There is a specific frequency to butter when it hits the perfect stage of hazelnut brown, a distinct auditory shift from a wet, aggressive hiss to a dry, frothy sigh. It is the sound of water evaporating, leaving behind only fat and milk solids, ready to accept the flour. Most people cook with their eyes. They look for colour. I cook with my ears and the sensitive nerve endings in my fingertips. I was standing in my kitchen, the one with the oak cabinets that have absorbed 3 decades of rosemary and thyme oil, listening to the butter. It was singing the correct song. I added the flour, equal parts by weight, not volume, never volume, and began the whisk. The movement is not a circle. It is a figure eight, a continuous loop that prevents the roux from catching in the corners of the saucepan. It is a meditation. At 71, my knees ache when it rains, and my lower back feels like a rusted hinge. But my wrist is still a metronome. I was making a bechamel, a mother sauce. The simplest things are the hardest to hide behind. If you ruin a bechamel, you have nowhere to go. You cannot mask the scorched flour with truffles or distract from the graininess with gold leaf. It is milk, flour, butter, nutmeg, salt. That is all. It requires absolute terrifying honesty. I watched the mixture bubble, a pale velvety lava. I leaned in, inhaling the steam. It smelled of comfort, of safety, of a technical proficiency that had taken me 50 years to master. I was just reaching for the nutmeg grater, microplane, stainless steel, kept razor sharp. When the phone vibrated against the granite countertop, it buzzed like an angry hornet, disrupting the rhythm of the sauce. I ignored it. The milk was coming up to temp in the second pot. Pouring cold milk into hot roux is a mistake amateurs make, seizing the starch. I tempered the mixture, a splash at a time, watching the emulsion form glossy and smooth. The phone stopped. The silence returned. I exhaled. Then it started again. Relentless. I turned the flame down to the lowest setting, a pilot light's whisper, and picked up the device. Sophia, I said. My voice sounded gravelly, unused. I hadn't spoken to anyone since the butcher yesterday. Dad. It wasn't a greeting. It was expulsion of breath, a jagged, broken sound. I could hear background noise, a cacophony of shouting, the clatter of china, and something else. A high-pitched, rhythmic beeping. Dad, come. Please. You have to come. She was hyperventilating. I could visualize her diaphragm spasming, her chest tight. Sophia, breathe. What is it? The pilot light? Did the gas line? It's a disaster, she sobbed, the words tearing out of her throat. The mayor. Oh God, Dad. The mayor is turning green. He collapsed in the vestibule. The ambulance is here. Julian is screaming about sabotage. He says the supplier poisoned us. Dad, everyone is sick. They're vomiting in the dining room. I don't know what to do. They're going to shut me down. They're going to arrest me. The bechamel popped, a single thick bubble rising to the surface and bursting with a wet plop. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with a sudden cold clarity, a shift in the atmosphere. The warmth of my kitchen seemed to drain away, replaced by the ghost of a sensation I hadn't felt in 15 years. The adrenaline of the line, the combat readiness. I'm coming, I said. I hung up. I turned off the stove. I looked at the sauce, perfect and useless, and poured it down the drain. It would form a skin if I left it. I grabbed my coat. I didn't grab my knives. I was just a father going to comfort his daughter after all. But I grabbed my tasting spoons. I always kept a set in my breast pocket, wrapped in leather. Old habits die hard. Or perhaps they never die at all. They just wait for the right temperature to reactivate. The drive to Ethereal usually took 20 minutes. I made it in 12. The restaurant was located in the Arts District, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that were currently flashing with the strobing red and blue lights of 3 ambulances and a fire truck. It looked less like a grand opening and more like a crime scene, which, I supposed, it was. I parked the old Volvo on the curb, half blocking a hydrant. Let them tow it. I walked toward the entrance. The air outside was cool, but as I pushed through the heavy glass doors, the heat hit me. It wasn't just thermal heat. It was the heat of human panic. The dining room, designed to be a sanctuary of minimalist luxury, with its polished concrete floors and floating light fixtures, was a bedlam. A woman in a sequined dress was being assisted onto a gurney, clutching an emesis basin to her chest. A man I recognized as the city councilman was sitting on the floor, head between his knees, groaning softly. The smell was the first thing that assaulted me. Underneath the expensive perfume and the metallic tang of fear, there was the sharp, sour odour of bile. It cut through the carefully curated aromas of the open kitchen, the burning herbs, the searing meat. I moved through the chaos like a ghost. A paramedic tried to stop me. "Sir, you can't be in here. This is a hazardous area." I didn't even look at him. I just kept moving, my eyes fixed on the double swinging doors at the back. "My daughter owns the place," I said, my voice low and flat. It was a lie of omission. She owned the paper, but tonight, the spirit of the kitchen belonged to the disaster. I pushed into the kitchen. If my kitchen at home was a chapel, the kitchen of Ethereal was a particle accelerator. It was all stainless steel and aggressive LED lighting, a cathedral of modernism. There were no humble pots simmering. There were immersion circulators humming in water baths, rotary evaporators spinning clear liquids, and tanks of liquid nitrogen hissing like snakes. It was impressive. It was expensive, and right now, it was a shipwreck. The brigade, 12 young cooks who looked like they had been drafted into a war they didn't understand, were frozen. Some were crying. One was scrubbing a station so hard his knuckles were white. And in the centre of the storm was Julian. Julian, the head chef. 30 years old, with sleeves of tattoos and a beard that was groomed better than his sauces. He was screaming at a sous chef, his face a mask of red fury. "It's the damn oysters. I told you to check the tags. It's Vibrio. It has to be Vibrio. Get them out. Dump everything." Sophia was standing near the pass, her makeup running, her hands trembling as she held a clipboard she wasn't reading. She looked small. She looked defeated. I stepped into the light. "Sophia," I said. She looked up, and the relief that washed over her face was painful to witness. "Dad." She ran to me, burying her face in my shoulder. She smelled of jasmine and sanitizer. "It's ruined. It's all ruined." I patted her back, my eyes scanning the room. "Hush now. Let me look." Julian spun around. He saw me, the old man in the cardigan, the retired nobody who made stews. "Who let him in?" he barked, his voice cracking. "Sophia, get your father out of here. This is a biohazard zone. We have a massive bacterial outbreak. The health inspector is 5 minutes away. I don't need a geriatric liability wandering around my station." I released Sophia gently and stepped toward him. I didn't shout. I didn't puff out my chest. I just walked. I walked the line. I knew this walk. I had walked it 10,000 times. My feet knew where the mats ended and the tile began. I moved past the garnish station. I looked at the mise en place. Tweezers lined up like surgical instruments, micro herbs and damp paper towels. "Get out!" Julian yelled, stepping in my path. "Did you hear me? We have sick people out there. It's the oysters. I know it's the oysters." I stopped. I looked him up and down. His chef's whites were spotted with green oil. His eyes were dilated. "Move," I said. It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the weight of 1,000 dinner services. Julian blinked, surprised by the sudden steel in my voice. He hesitated, and that was enough. I stepped around him. I went to the trash. A kitchen tells you its secrets in the garbage. I stepped on the pedal. Oyster shells. I picked one up, ignoring Julian's gasp of disgust. I brought it to my nose. It smelled of the ocean. Clean. Brine. Mineral. No sulfur. No ammonia. These oysters were harvested yesterday. They were alive until they were shucked. "It's not the oysters," I said, tossing the shell back. "The smell is wrong. Vibrio presents with a distinct decay. This is clean." Julian scoffed, a nervous, jagged sound. "What would you know? You think you can smell a pathogen? This is science, not Grandma's soup kitchen." I ignored him. I moved to the prep station. I looked at the sous vide bags. Duck breast. Perfectly sealed. I looked at the nitrogen tank. I looked at the foams. Ah, the foams. The darling of the modernist movement. Air and flavour, suspended for a fleeting moment. There was a tray of half-finished plates on the pass. The plates that had been stopped from going out when the first body hit the floor. The signature dish. I stared at it. A raw scallop with fermented elderflower foam. It sat on a beautiful dark ceramic plate. The scallop was sliced into translucent coins. The foam was a pale celadon green, trembling slightly under the heat lamps. It looked like sea foam. It looked innocent. "Don't touch that," Julian screamed as I reached for the plate. "That's the vector. It has to be. The mayor ate 2 of those." I picked up the plate. I brought it to eye level. I examined the viscosity of the foam. It was tight. The bubbles uniform. Lecithin or gelatin? Probably lecithin. I smelled it. Elderflower, floral, sweet, heady. But underneath the floral notes, there was something else. Something sharp. Something that tickled the back of my nose in a way that had nothing to do with flowers. "Dad, don't," Sophia whispered. "Please. It's dangerous." I looked at her. "Cooking is always dangerous, Sophia. We play with fire and knives and things that grow in the dirt. Trust me." I reached into my pocket and withdrew the leather pouch. I unrolled it and took out a silver tasting spoon. It was an antique, worn smooth by years of sauces. "You're insane," Julian hissed. "You're going to get sick, you idiot. If you eat that and collapse, I'm not resuscitating you." I dipped the spoon into the foam. Just the foam. I didn't take the scallop. I didn't need the protein. The protein was just a canvas. The sauce was the paint. I lifted the spoon to my lips. The kitchen went silent. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation and the distant sirens. I placed the spoon in my mouth. I didn't swallow immediately. I let it sit on the tongue. I closed my eyes, shutting down the visual input to amplify the gustatory data. First wave. Sweetness. The elderflower syrup. Heavy, cloying. Too sweet, actually. Julian had oversugared it to compensate for something. Second wave. Acid. Lemon juice? No, vinegar. Champagne vinegar, sharp, clean. Third wave, the texture, airy, dissolving instantly into liquid. Fourth wave, the finish. And there it was. It wasn't a flavour exactly. It was a sensation. A vibration on the side of the tongue. Metallic. Bitter. Astringent. It tasted like licking a battery. It tasted like an old penny held in a sweaty palm. It coated the roof of my mouth with a dry, fuzzy feeling. My salivary glands clenched, but not from the acid. They clenched in defence. The taste bloomed, turning from metallic to nauseatingly rich, a deep chemical wrongness that triggered a primal alarm in the reptilian brain. Poison. Eject. Julian was right about one thing. It was toxic, but he was wrong about the source. I opened my eyes. Julian was watching me with a mix of horror and morbid curiosity, waiting for me to retch, waiting for the old man to fall. I didn't fall. I swallowed. It was a small amount, not enough to do permanent damage, but enough to confirm the hypothesis. I felt the slight burn in the esophagus. I smiled. It was a grim, mirthless smile. I wiped the spoon on a napkin and placed it back in my pocket. "Well?" Julian demanded, his arms crossed defensively. "Do you feel it? The nausea?" "It's the bacteria, isn't it?" I turned away from him. I walked toward the stove, specifically toward the sauce station. There was a stack of pans there. Expensive pans. Heavy. Copper. But not the stainless steel lined copper that is standard in modern kitchens. These were vintage, or reproductions of vintage. They were bright, polished copper on the outside, and on the inside. I picked one up. It was heavy. I ran my finger along the inside rim. It felt rough, pitted. "It's not the scallops, Julian," I said, my voice calm, projecting clearly over the hum of the machinery. I held up the pan. "And it's not bacteria. It's not a virus. It's not sabotage." I turned the pan so the light hit the interior. "You reduced the elderflower syrup in this, didn't you? High acid. Long reduction time. High heat." Julian looked confused. "Yeah. So what? It's a traditional French copper reduction pan. It conducts heat better." "It's unlined copper," I said. "It's meant for sugar work. Caramel. Praline. Neutral pH ingredients. You boiled vinegar and acidic elderflower in raw copper for, what, 20 minutes? 30. Julian hesitated. 40 minutes. To concentrate the flavour." 40 minutes, I repeated. I looked at Sophia. She was staring at me, her eyes wide. She was starting to understand. She remembered the chemistry lessons I used to give her over breakfast. "Acid plus copper plus heat plus oxygen," I recited, looking back at Julian. "You didn't cook dinner, chef." "You dissolved the lining of the pan into the sauce. You created copper acetate. Verdigris." I walked back to the plate with the scallop and pointed to the innocent-looking green foam. "That colour, that celadon green, that's not the elderflower stems. Elderflower reduces to a brown or a pale gold. That green is copper salts. You synthesized a mild neurotoxin and fed it to the mayor." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The noise of the sirens outside seemed to fade away. Julian's face went from red to a terrifying shade of pale white. He looked at the pan in my hand. He looked at the foam. "Copper toxicity," I continued, my voice mercilessly clinical. "Symptoms: nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, metallic taste, diarrhea. Onset is rapid, usually within minutes. Matches the timeline perfectly." I set the pan down on the counter with a heavy thud. The sound echoed like a gavel strike. You poisoned them with your cookware because you don't know your metallurgy, I said softly. You have all the centrifuges in the world, but you don't know your pots. Julian opened his mouth to speak, to argue, but nothing came out. He slumped against the prep table. Sophia let out a small sob of relief, realizing it wasn't a bacteria that would condemn the building, but a mistake. A terrible negligence mistake, but a solvable one. Get the paramedics, I told Sophia. Tell them it's acute copper toxicity. They need to treat for heavy metal poisoning, not food poisoning. Stomach pumping, maybe chelation if they ate a lot, but they'll live. Tell them to stop looking for oysters. Sophia nodded frantically and ran toward the doors. I stood there, in the middle of the high-tech laboratory, feeling the ache in my knees and the lingering metallic taste in my mouth. I looked at Julian. He was broken. He was a boy in a man's costume. Wash your station, I said to him, and throw that pan away. But the night wasn't over. The kitchen was still in chaos. Orders were backed up, and while the medical emergency was being handled, the reputation of Ethereal hung by a thread. I looked at the line of terrified cooks. They were leaderless. Julian was catatonic. Sophia was managing the crisis in the dining room. I took off my cardigan. I folded it neatly and placed it on a clean shelf. I rolled up the sleeves of my button-down shirt. My forearms were scarred with the topography of 1,000 burns, the map of my life. Right, I said, clapping my hands once, sharp, loud. Listen to me. The cooks looked up. They looked at the old man who had just diagnosed a poisoning by tasting it. The menu is dead, I announced. We are not serving foam. We are not serving nitrogen. We are scrubbing the toxicity from this kitchen. I walked to the walk-in cooler and kicked the door open. I scanned the shelves. I see eggs. I see cream. I see potatoes. I see ribeyes. I turned back to the brigade. The adrenaline was fully engaged now. The Alchemist was waking up. We're going to pivot, I growled. We're going to cook actual food. You, I pointed to the weeping boy at the garnish station. Stop crying. Can you peel a potato? He nodded, sniffing. Good. We're making a potato pave. You, I pointed to the sous chef. Get those steaks out of the water bath. We're going to sear them, hard, in cast iron. Do we have cast iron? Yes, chef, she whispered. I can't hear you, I roared. Yes, chef, she shouted back, her spine straightening instinctively. Good. I walked to the pass. I grabbed a clean apron. I tied it around my waist. It felt like armour. I looked at the ticket machine. It was silent, but soon the people who hadn't been poisoned would be hungry. And the critics were still out there, writing their obituaries for the restaurant. We had to change the narrative. Clean down, I ordered. Strip the stations. We start over in 5 minutes. Move. They moved. It wasn't the frantic, terrified movements of before. It was directed energy. I stood at the pass, feeling the heat of the ovens on my face. I wasn't billed a retiree anymore. I was back. And for the first time in 15 years, the noise in my head went quiet, replaced by the beautiful, terrible focus of the service. I picked up a knife. I checked the edge against my thumbnail. It was dull. Who sharpens these knives? I muttered to myself. I grabbed a steel. Swing, swing, swing. The sound cut through the air. I was ready. But as I looked at the copper pan still sitting on the counter, the green residue glinting under the lights, I knew this was just the beginning. Julian's mistake was amateur, yes. But a copper pan doesn't just lose its lining overnight. That's pitting. I narrowed my eyes. I walked back to the pan. I ran my fingernail over the inside again. These weren't natural wear marks. These were scratches. Deep, gouged scratches. Someone had taken steel wool or a scouring pad to the inside of that pan. Someone had deliberately stripped the tin lining to expose the copper. Julian was incompetent, yes, but he wasn't suicidal. He wouldn't strip a pan. I looked up, scanning the kitchen, scanning the faces of the crew. Someone here didn't just make a mistake. Someone wanted Ethereal to fail. The sabotage Julian screamed about? He might have been right about the intent, if not the method. My eyes landed on the dishwasher, a silent, hulking figure in the back, spraying down trays. He wasn't looking at the commotion. He was whistling. I tightened my apron strings. The cooking was the easy part. The chemistry was simple. But the human element? That was always where the mixture broke. "First course," I shouted. "Fire!" The kitchen exploded into action. I took a breath. The metallic taste was fading, replaced by the iron tang of anticipation. "But it gives it colour," Julian stammered, his voice rising an octave, desperate to cling to the shreds of his authority. He pointed a shaking finger at the copper pan I had isolated on the counter. "The copper ions react with the chlorophyll in the herbs. It stabilizes the green. It's a classic technique. Escoffier used copper. Point used copper." I looked at him, and for a moment, I didn't see a chef. I saw a child playing with a chemistry set he hadn't read the manual for. I didn't shout. Shouting is for people who have lost control. I spoke with the quiet, crushing weight of absolute fact. Escoffier used lined copper for acids, Julian. He used unlined copper for sugar. You are confusing aesthetic with chemistry. You are confusing a photograph in a magazine with the thermal reaction of metal. I picked up a whisk. It was a cheap thing, a wire loop on a plastic handle, but in my hand it felt like a gavel. I tapped the rim of the pan. Tink, tink. The sound was dull, dead. Acid plus copper plus heat equals verdigris. Copper 2 acetate. It's not a stabilizer, it's a salt. And when it hits the hydrochloric acid in the human stomach, it becomes a corrosive irritant. You didn't stabilize the colour. You painted the mayor's insides with poison because you thought the pot looked pretty on the stove. Julian opened his mouth to argue, but the swinging doors of the kitchen flew open with a violence that silenced the room. The air pressure in the kitchen actually dropped. The chaotic noise of the dining room, the sirens, the crying, the panic, surged in for a second, then was cut off as the doors swung shut. Standing there was a woman. She was in her late 50s, wearing a trench coat that cost more than my car, and holding a clipboard like a weapon. Her hair was a severe iron grey bob, cut with a geometry that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. I knew her type. I had feared her type 40 years ago. Now I just respected the predator. It was Miss Vance, the city health inspector, but not just an inspector. She was the executioner. Legend had it she once closed a 3-star restaurant because she found a single fly in the ice machine. She didn't look at the cooks. She didn't look at Julian. She looked at the floor, checking for grease. She looked at the ceiling, checking for dust. Then she walked straight to the pass, her heels clicking a rhythmic death march on the tile. She pulled a red tag from her pocket, the closure order. "Nobody move," she said. Her voice was like dry ice. "This facility is under immediate suspension. I have 3 confirmed cases of heavy metal toxicity in the ambulance bay. I have the mayor vomiting blue bile. I am seizing all food products. I am revoking the license. Everyone out, now. Sophia stepped forward, her face a ruin of mascara and tears. Miss Vance, please. It was an accident. We can fix it. We can. You can't fix negligence, Miss Rosie, Vance said, uncapping a pen to sign the death warrant of Ethereal. You have poisoned the city administration. You are done. Julian shrank back against the convection ovens, trying to become invisible. He knew the career homicide that was about to happen. I stepped in. I didn't rush. I moved with the heavy hydraulic grace of a man who has stood on concrete for 50 years. I placed my hand gently over the clipboard, covering the paper she was about to sign. Vance looked up. Her eyes were like lasers, scanning me. She saw the cardigan on the shelf. She saw the apron over my street clothes. She saw the grey stubble. Remove your hands, sir, or I will have the police remove you. You have a toxicity issue, I said, my voice matching hers for coldness. You have unbound copper ions in the lipid suspension. You are right to close it. But if you close it now, you destroy the reputation of the staff who didn't cook the sauce. You destroy the runners, the dishwashers, the prep cooks. The boy peeling potatoes over there had nothing to do with the reduction. I don't care about the staff, she snapped. I care about the public safety. The sauce is poison. The sauce is broken chemistry, I corrected. Give me 10 minutes. To do what? Pray? To fix the emulsion, I said. To show you that this kitchen knows how to handle the variables. If I can neutralize the pH and bind the remaining copper in a stable fat matrix, if I can turn this poison into a palatable, safe compound right in front of your eyes, you let the service finish. You let them pivot to the steak and potatoes. You keep the license pending a full review tomorrow. If I fail, you arrest me along with the chef. Vance narrowed her eyes. She looked at the copper pan. She looked at me. She was a bureaucrat, yes. She was also a gourmand. I could see it in the way she held her jaw. She was curious. You can't unpoison a sauce, old man. Watch me. I didn't wait for her permission. I turned to the station. Julian, I barked. Get out of my way. You're now a spectator. I grabbed the pan. Not the poisoned one. I wasn't insane. But a clean stainless steel saucier. I grabbed the bowl of the contaminated base, the raw elderflower and vinegar mixture that hadn't yet been reduced in the copper, the control batch. It was sharp, acidic, aggressive. Time me, I said to the room. I cranked the heat, high. The flame roared. I tossed a shallot into the pan, not to cook it, but to scent the steel. I deglazed with the raw elderflower vinegar. It hit the hot metal with a scream of steam. I let it reduce. Cream! I yelled. The sous chef, the girl I'd yelled at earlier, threw me a carton. I caught it mid-air and poured. The liquid bubbled up, threatening to boil over. I killed the heat. This was the moment. The emulsion. Butter. Cubed. Cold. Now. They scrambled. A container of Plus Gras butter, chilled to rock hardness, slid across the counter. I grabbed a handful. I didn't weigh it. My hand was the scale. I dropped the cubes into the hot reduction. Now the whisk. I started the motion. It wasn't just stirring. It was shearing. I was forcing the fat globules to suspend in the liquid, creating a colloidal suspension that would coat the tongue, protecting the palate. I needed to create a beurre blanc, but heavier, denser. A beurre nantaise on steroids. The fat would act as a collating buffer in the mouth, masking any residual metallic notes from the base ingredients, softening the blow of the acid. My wrist was a blur. Whisk, 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 whisk. The sauce began to change. It went from a thin, translucent liquid to a thick, opaque, glossy ivory. It was tightening. I added a squeeze of lemon, citric acid to cut the lactic acid. Balance. Always balance. I grabbed the salt. Kosher. Pinch. Throw. I grabbed white pepper. Pinch. Throw. The kitchen was silent. Mrs. Vance was watching the rotation of my wrist. She was watching the way I tilted the pan, playing the flame like an instrument, moving the sauce on and off the heat to keep the emulsion from breaking. It was a dance I had performed 1,000,000 times in the dark, in the heat, in the pain of the 80s. Plate, I ordered. Sophia slid a clean plate onto the pass. I poured the sauce. It didn't splash. It didn't run. It robed. It pooled in the centre of the plate, a perfect, mirror-smooth circle of ivory velvet. It held its shape. The surface tension was absolute. I took a clean spoon. I dipped it. I walked to Miss Vance. "Taste it," I said. "This is highly irregular," she said, but her hand was already reaching for the spoon. The smell had hit her. The smell of perfect emulsified butter and floral elderflower. No metallic tang. No death. Just rich, unadulterated technique. She put the spoon in her mouth. I watched her throat. I watched her eyes. She froze. The clipboard lowered slightly. Her eyes, which had been hard shards of flint, suddenly lost focus. She wasn't ethereal anymore. She was travelling. That's what great food does. It's a time machine. She swallowed. She didn't speak for a long 10 seconds. She ran her tongue over her teeth, searching for the copper, searching for the flaw. There was none. There was only the luxurious coating mouthfeel of a master sauce. Then she looked at my hand. I was still holding the whisk. My sleeve was rolled up. On the inside of my right forearm, just below the elbow, was a scar. It was a burn, shaped like a crescent moon, where a falling stockpot had branded me in 1979. It was silvery, jagged, and unmistakable to anyone who knew the history of the culinary underground. Vance's eyes widened. She looked from the scar to my face, really seeing me for the first time. She looked past the wrinkles, past the retiree cardigan, and saw the structure of the bones underneath. "The white heat," she whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of religious awe. I didn't say anything. I just set the whisk down. "I ate this sauce," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "In Paris, L'Ombre, 1982. The night the critic from Le Monde had a heart attack at the table, and the chef kept cooking. The service must complete," I said simply. "That is the rule. You are him. You are the alchemist. You vanished. They said you burned out. They said you lost your palate." "I didn't lose it," I said, wiping a spot of sauce from the rim of the pan. "I just decided to use it for simpler things, like feeding my daughter." Vance looked at Sophia, then back at me. She took a deep breath. She pulled the red tag off the clipboard and crumpled it into her pocket. "The restaurant stays open," she announced. The kitchen let out a collective gasp of oxygen. "Under 2 conditions." She stepped closer to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that only the brigade could hear. "Condition 1. All copper cookware is removed from the premises immediately. Condition 2. He runs the pass." She pointed a manicured finger at me. "If you leave that station, I shut you down. If I see Julian touch a sauce, I shut you down." She turned to Julian, who was looking at me as if I had just sprouted wings. "You," she said to him. "You're lucky you aren't in handcuffs. If you want to keep your license, you will do exactly what he says. You are demoted. Peel potatoes. Scrub the floor. I don't care. But do not cook. She turned back to the doors. I will manage the mayor. I will tell them it was a localized reaction to a supplier error that has been contained. You have one night to redeem this place. Don't make me regret it. And with the click-clack of her heels, she was gone. The silence that followed was heavy, heavier than the panic. It was the silence of a paradigm shift. I looked at Julian. He was stripped bare. His tattoos, his beard, his ego. It all looked like a costume now. You heard the lady, I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was just business. Potatoes. Large dice for the pavé. Go. Julian hesitated. For a split second, I thought he would walk out. But the shame held him. And perhaps the curiosity. He wanted to see if the legend was true. He nodded, head down, and walked to the prep station. He picked up a peeler. I turned to Sophia. She was staring at me, tears streaming down her face. But she wasn't hyperventilating anymore. She looked like a little girl who had just discovered her dad was a superhero, but was also terrified of the cape. Dad, she whispered. I didn't know. The stories. I thought they were just stories. They were, I said, and stories end. Now we have work. I wanted to be modern, she sobbed, gesturing at the centrifuges, the liquid nitrogen. I wanted to be new. I wanted to be relevant. I walked over to her. I took a clean towel and wiped a smudge of soot from her cheek. Food isn't about being new, Sophia, I said, my voice soft enough to be just for her. It isn't about shock value. It isn't about extracting the essence of a cloud or freezing a rose. I gestured to the dining room, where the hum of conversation was slowly returning, where the survivors of the first course were waiting for salvation. It's about safety, I said. It's about trust. When a stranger puts a spoon in their mouth, they are trusting you not to kill them. That is the contract. And beyond that, it's about love. You forgot the love. You were so busy trying to impress them. You forgot to feed them. I turned back to the pass. I clapped my hands. The sound cracked like a whip. Right, I yelled, and the authority of my voice made the stainless steel vibrate. Listen to me. We are pivoting. No foams, no gels, no spherification. We are cooking with fire and metal and instinct. Yes, chef, the brigade shouted. It was a real shout this time, a primal response to a leader. Table 4 needs ribeyes. Table 7 needs the potato puree. I want hard sears. I want butter basting. I want aromatics. If it isn't perfect, it doesn't leave this pass. Are we clear? Yes, chef. Service. The next 3 hours were a blur. A beautiful, violent, rhythmic blur. I didn't think. I just flowed. I called the tickets. Order in. Fire. Pick up. I wiped the rims of plates. I tasted every sauce. I corrected the seasoning. More salt. More acid. Too thick. Loose. I moved Julian's sous chef aside and showed her how to properly baste a steak, tilting the pan, spooning the foaming butter over the meat until it was a mahogany brown. Hear that? I asked her, listening to the sizzle. That's the water leaving. That's the crust forming. Respect the sound. She looked at me with wide eyes, absorbing the lesson. Yes, chef. Sophia worked the floor. She calmed the guests. She poured wine. She told them the kitchen was under the personal supervision of a consulting specialist. She smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a real smile. The plates went out. Empty plates came back. The complaints stopped. The compliments started. The best steak I've ever had. The potatoes were divine. Who is back there? I didn't care about the compliments. I cared about the rhythm. I cared that the machine was working. By 1 a.m., the last ticket was cleared. The last guest had left. The mayor was stable and resting in the hospital. I had sent a complimentary soup to his room, a simple consommé, safe and restorative. The kitchen was quiet again. The brigade was scrubbing down. They moved with a new energy. They were exhausted, but they were proud. They had survived the trenches. I untied my apron. It was stained with grease and reduction. I folded it. Julian was still at the prep sink. He had peeled 50 pounds of potatoes. He looked at me. His eyes were red, but the arrogance was gone. "Chef," he said. It was the first time he had used the title with respect. The emulsion. How did you know the fat would bind the copper?" "I didn't," I lied. "But I knew butter makes everything taste better, and I knew confidence tastes like competence." I walked over to Sophia. She was sitting on a stool, holding a glass of cheap wine. She looked exhausted and beautiful. "You saved me," she said. "I cooked dinner," I corrected. "There's a difference. Will you come back? Tomorrow?" She looked hopeful. We could rename the place. The Alchemist." I smiled and shook my head. I reached for my cardigan. "No, sweetheart. This is your kitchen. You know what to do now. Sell the copper. Buy some cast iron. Cook with your heart, not your ego." I put on my coat. My joints were screaming. My back felt like it was on fire. I was 71 years old, and I had just run a 300 cover service at sprint speed. I was done. "Where are you going?" she asked as I pushed open the back door, letting the cool night air flood in. It smelled of rain and exhaust, the perfume of the city. I paused. I looked back at the gleaming stainless steel, the blinking lights of the machines I hated, and the daughter I loved. "I'm going home," I said. "I have a bechamel in the fridge, and if I don't stir it soon, it's going to get a skin." I walked out into the alley. I didn't look back. I got into my old Volvo. I checked my mirrors. I merged into traffic. The panic was over. The palate was satisfied. And the butter was waiting to sing.